So I'm making this leather-bound journal for my dad's birthday, and I want to add his initials to the cover. I'm going to use an embossing technique that looks really good on book covers, but you can also use it on all sorts of leather projects. So we're in Fusion 360, and I'm going to start by creating a sketch on the XY plane. Now on the sketch, we're going to create text. Draw my text box, and my dad's initials are CJK. I'm gonna create a new parameter and call it text height. And I'll try 1.5 inches. So if I double click on my text, I'll change the height to my text height parameter. That way we can change this later on. And I need to find a good font. So I know I want something with serifs. So let's see what we got. Cambria. That looks pretty nice. I think that would be his style. So I have my leather here, and I'm gonna measure the thickness to get a sense of how thick I want the embossing. The leather is about 0.05 inches thick, or 50 thousandths of an inch. I'll create a parameter called embossing thickness, and I'll try 0.07 inches. Now I can click on my text, right click, go to press pull. Now this doesn't always work. Sometimes you need to explode the text before you extrude it, but we'll try press pulling by embossing thickness. There we go, it worked that time, so we can hit enter, and that is gonna be the inside of our embossing. Now to make the outside, I'm gonna create a new sketch on the XY plane, hit P for project, and project each of my letters. Now we need another parameter. This is gonna be the distance between the positive and the negative. I'm going to call this gap, and it's important that this gap is large enough that our leather can fit in between the positive and the negative. Obviously that minimum would be the leather thickness, so 0.05 inches, but I want a more gradual transition. So I'm going to make my gap 0.1 inches. And I'm gonna double click on each of those outlines while holding Shift to select them, and then offset. So our offset distance will be the gap. Now I'm gonna draw a rectangle that encompasses all of my letters in the border, keeping in mind that you want enough space so that you have strength in your 3D printed negative. And now I can click inside this profile. We need a final parameter, and this one is going to be the negative thickness. We want this to be thick enough such that our leather doesn't poke out the top and is squished by the piece of wood that we're gonna use to cushion the clamp. But we don't want it so thick that we're wasting filament. So 0.15 inches I think will be a happy medium, and extrude that by the negative thickness. So you can see here how our stamp will work. The negative is going to form the leather around the positive, and it will be the negative that dictates the shape of our letters. The outline of the letters will follow the outline of the negative. So, keeping that in mind, when you select a font, you either want to select a positive font that's relatively skinny so that when you offset it outwards, you don't end up with a super bubbly font, unless that's what you want, unless that's the look you're going for. You can also select a relatively thick font, use that for the negative stamp, and then offset it inwards and use that to create your positive. It's all a matter of what your 3D printer can print and the look you're going for. So before I 3D print, I'm going to create a new component, and I'm going to call this the positive. Now I'll take the C, J, and the K and drag those into the positive. The reason I'm doing this is so now when I go to 3D print, I can just select that positive component and it will only 3D print the positive letters. So there's the positive on my build plate. I'm gonna print this with the maximum layer thickness I can get away with. There's no real reason to print with a really small layer height. And I'm going to add a brim. The reason I'm adding a brim is the first time I tried this technique, I had to manually align the letters. It was really annoying, and by using a brim, we can basically attach our layers together, and because the brim is so thin, it won't show up in our final embossing. As it is currently, this brim won't hold them together because the brims aren't touching. So I need to increase the size of the brim. It's currently 5 millimeters. Let's up it to 12 millimeters. We'll slice again. And now our brim components are touching. Awesome, so we can go ahead and 3D print that. If you're interested in directly supporting this channel and helping me make more videos, I have a Patreon page which I will link in the description. There are some cool benefits over there, including stickers and a patrons exclusive Instagram page where I share behind the scenes content. Nice, so the brim successfully held the letters together and it fits perfectly on our book board. Oh, that's gonna look awesome. We are going to glue this to our book board. So I'm gonna make sure it's centered. All right, so I'll just trace around the brim so we know where to glue it down. Apply some of our bookbinding glue inside our outline. This is a pH neutral PVA glue that's really great for bookbinding. I'll have a link for this in the description. And just glue that inside our outline. For the negative piece, the only thing you really have to keep in mind with the slicing is that none of your components are so thin that they won't get printed. That's a risk you run in doing this embossing technique. Let's say the distance between the serifs on the K was so small, it could be smaller than the extrusion width and it wouldn't get printed. But that looks good, so we can print the negative as well. Awesome. Got that nice 1/10 of an inch gap all the way around. So we can lay out our book boards. We got our front cover, which will go on the left side so that when we open it, the embossing is on the front. Set these aside for right now and we'll focus on the front. Now our negative doesn't fully cover the book board, so I'm going to glue this in stages. I'm gonna start by only gluing the part which is under the negative. Ideally, we would have the negative cover the entire book board, which we could do, but that would require a lot of 3D printing filament and time, and I think this will still work out really well and just have less waste. Grab my brush and just brush that into all the nooks and crannies. And I'll take that and turn it upside down on my leather. And then very carefully, trying not to slip anything, turn it over. And you can already see the positive coming through. So I'll take my negative and just start pushing it into place. There you go, you can already see it coming through. That's gonna look really good. It should sort of self-center. And then I'll place a piece of scrap wood on top and use the long reach clamp to apply a bit of pressure. We don't need to do too much. As you saw, the impression was already taking shape. Just applying a little bit of pressure to make sure it sets really crisp. If we apply too much pressure, we're gonna get a really harsh line around the border of our negative. I'll leave that for about 30 minutes to dry. It's been about 30 minutes, so let's take the clamp off and see what we got. Ooh, that looks good. We barely even got a border around it. Nice. Super happy with that. All right, so now we can put some glue on the inside and glue the rest of this down. Lay that down. Now I'll take my bone folder and use that to press down the leather on the rest of the book board. And I'll just put some weight on that to make sure it stays flat as it dries. This technique looks so good on book covers, but in other leatherworking projects, you probably don't want a 3D printed piece embedded inside. Luckily, there's another way to do this where you can remove the 3D printed positive. Let me show you how to do that. I have this 1 to 2 ounce piece of veg tan leather, and I'm gonna soak it in water to soften it up. When you soak veg tan leather in water, it turns into a plastic material, so when you stamp or emboss it, that impression is permanent. So I like to move it around, and you can start to feel when it becomes very plastic. It starts to kind of hold its shape when you fold it. It's kind of like putty. I'm gonna take my 3D printed positive, lay it down, and then take my softened leather and lay it down on top of that. And I'll start pushing it into the stamp, and we should start seeing the letters come through. We just need to see them enough so we can line up our negative stamp and push it into place. There we go. Just like before, I'll place a piece of scrap wood on top and then clamp it to the table. I'll leave it here for about 10-15 minutes, then we'll take it off and see what it looks like. Ooh, look at that. That is beautiful. So crisp. So if we peel up the leather right now, we might mess up the embossing because it's still very plastic since it's still soaking wet. So I'm gonna leave this to dry on the positive and then I'll separate them. So the leather is fully dried. I hit it with some neatsfoot oil and I am super happy with how this looks. One of the things that surprised me is you can barely see the border where the negative was imprinted into the leather. That's one of the key reasons you don't want to apply too much pressure, and I think that's one of the big advantages with this style of embossing. If you've watched my other video on 3D printed embossing, that involves pressing a stamp into the surface and depressing all of this area around your raised shapes. With this technique, what you're doing is you're pushing the back up. And because that's the main application of force, you don't get that same depression of the surface, and you can get away with stamping in a really small area. I believe that this method of using a positive and negative stamp is relatively common when embossing paper, but I wasn't able to find a specific name for this when used with leather, so let me know in the comments if you know what this technique is called with leather embossing. That being said, I am super excited about this method. I think it opens up a ton of possibilities, especially when it comes to bookbinding. I mean, that looks so good. I don't know what else to say. I'm super happy to give this to my dad. He still doesn't know about it, so if you know Charlie Kurt, don't say a word. He might watch my videos. If he does, he'll see it coming. It's all good. If you want to see the whole process of making this hardcover leather-bound book, make sure you subscribe because I'm making an entire video about that process. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.